90 minutes remained before a man would be executed. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask to call his family. He didn't pray. His final request stunned the entire prison. He asked to see a golden retriever police dog. No one understood why a condemned man would choose a dog for his last moments. But when the door opened and the dog's eyes met the man sentenced to die, something no one expected began to unfold. That night, it wasn't just a life that was saved. A truth buried for 5 long years finally began to breathe again. The clock on the concrete wall read 11:30 p.m. 90 minutes remained. In the execution wing of the Huntsville unit, time did not move the way it did anywhere else. It thickened. Every second felt weighted, deliberate, as if it knew it mattered more than ordinary time. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting a pale sheen over the narrow hallway where metal doors stood in perfect, unforgiving alignment. Daniel Cooper sat alone on the edge of a steel bench, his wrists resting loosely on his knees. Chains circled his ankles, cold against his skin, but he barely seemed to notice them. He had stopped shifting his weight an hour ago. He had stopped asking questions even earlier than that. What struck the officers on duty was not fear. They had seen fear countless times, men shaking, praying, bargaining with whatever power they believed might still be listening. Daniel did none of that. His breathing was steady. His gaze stayed fixed on the clock, following the second hand as it crawled forward, one quiet click at a time. Officer Mark Reynolds watched him through the narrow observation window. Mark had worked this wing for 22 years. He had learned not to speculate about the inner lives of condemned men. Curiosity, he believed, was a liability. Procedure was safer. Procedure kept emotions in check and mistakes at bay. Still, something about Daniel unsettled him. "You all right in there?" Mark asked, his voice neutral, professional. Daniel didn't look away from the clock. "As all right as a man can be," he said calmly. His voice was rough but controlled, shaped by years of restraint. "How long now?" Mark glanced at his watch. 90 minutes. Daniel nodded once. "Plenty of time." That answer lingered in the air longer than it should have. The hallway echoed with distant footsteps and the low murmur of voices as staff moved through final checklists. Clipboards were signed. Phones rang and were silenced. The machine of the system prepared itself, as it always did, to carry out a decision made years earlier. Daniel's case had been closed for a long time. 5 years earlier, a jury had found him guilty of a brutal double homicide during a warehouse robbery gone wrong. The evidence had seemed clean enough, circumstantial, but convincing. A partial fingerprint. A shoe print consistent with his size. Most damning of all, a scent identification conducted by a police dog that linked Daniel to an item found near the victims. Daniel had never fought hard on the stand. He had spoken little. When the verdict came down, he had closed his eyes, as if he had expected nothing else. Now, with 90 minutes left, the state gave him one final courtesy. Mark stepped into the holding room, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cooper," he said, "this is the time we ask about final arrangements. Phone call, spiritual advisor. Last request." Daniel finally turned his head. His eyes were tired, but clear. There was no panic in them, no desperation. If anything, there was something closer to resolve. "I don't need a call," Daniel said, "and I already made my peace." Mark checked a box on the form. "Then what's your request?" Daniel hesitated. Just a second, long enough for Mark to notice. "I want to see the dog," Daniel said. Mark looked up. "What dog?" "The golden retriever," Daniel replied. "Police K9. The one from my case." The words landed heavy, unfamiliar. Mark frowned. "That's not possible." "I figured you'd say that," Daniel said quietly. "But that's my request." Mark had heard many strange requests over the years. Cigarettes, specific meals, music played from a radio. He had never heard this. "There are rules," Mark said. "Security protocols. Animals aren't part of this process." Daniel's gaze dropped back to the clock. "He was part of the process when I was sentenced." Mark felt a flicker of irritation. "That was years ago." "Doesn't matter," Daniel said. "He remembers." The second hand clicked forward. Mark closed his clipboard. "I'll report your request," he said. "No promises." "That's all I ask," Daniel replied. As Mark stepped back into the hallway, he paused longer than he intended. He told himself it was nothing. Just another condemned man reaching for meaning where there was none. Yet as he walked toward the duty desk to make the call, a thought surfaced uninvited, uncomfortable in its persistence. In 22 years, Mark Reynolds had never seen a man so calm this close to the end, and none of them had ever asked to see a dog. Mark Reynolds didn't like surprises, not in this wing, not on a night like this. He walked back to the duty desk with Daniel Cooper's request sitting in his mind like a pebble in his shoe, small but impossible to ignore. The execution unit ran on routine, and routine was the only thing that kept men from making foolish decisions when the air got heavy and the clock got loud. He picked up the phone and dialed the number he already knew by heart. "Sergeant Harper," he said when the line connected. "It's Reynolds at Huntsville." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the soft, familiar sound of someone shifting paperwork. "Mark," a woman's voice answered, calm and alert. "What's going on?" "I've got a condemned man with a last request I've never heard before," Mark said. "He wants to see a K9, specifically your golden retriever. Buddy." Silence, then. "That can't be right," Sergeant Emily Harper said slowly. "Buddy's not a show dog. He's retired from field work, but he's still certified. Why would he want Buddy?" "He says Buddy was involved in his case," Mark replied. "He says the dog remembers." Emily didn't answer right away. Mark could picture her face. She was the type who didn't dramatize, didn't throw words around, but when something mattered, you could hear it in the way her voice tightened. "What's the inmate's name?" she asked. "Daniel Cooper." Another pause. Longer this time. "Oh," Emily said, so quietly Mark almost didn't catch it. "That case." Mark's jaw set. "You recognize it?" "I was on the perimeter that night," Emily said. "Not the lead handler then, but I remember the file. I remember Buddy's alert." Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall as if the cinder blocks could offer him a reason. "He's scheduled for midnight," Mark said. "I'm telling you up front. This request is not standard, and I don't have to grant it." "I know," Emily said. "But, Mark, Buddy doesn't behave like other dogs. You know that. He's steady, gentle, and when he alerts, he's consistent. We don't get false alarms from him." "That's the point," Mark replied. "We don't invite variables into a locked procedure." Emily exhaled. "Let me ask you something," she said. "How's Cooper acting?" Mark hesitated. "Too calm," he admitted. Emily went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "If he's calm, it's not because he thinks he's getting out," she said. "It's because he believes something is already decided." "That something would be his execution," Mark said. "Or the truth," Emily answered. Mark felt irritation flare, then fade into something less certain. "You're making a leap," he said. "I'm telling you what I'm feeling," Emily replied. And Mark, that case always felt too neat, too clean for what it was, like a story somebody wanted to close. Mark stared down at the clipboard in front of him. Boxes and signatures, dates, times, everything tied up with a bow. "And you think a last-minute visit from a dog is going to reopen it?" he asked. Emily didn't bite at the sarcasm. "I think it might explain why he asked," she said. "And I think if you refuse, and something comes out later, you'll be the man who shut the door." Mark said nothing. He hated that she was putting weight on his hands. Before he could answer, another phone on the desk rang, an outside line. Mark held up a finger, though Emily couldn't see it. "Hold," he said, and covered the receiver. He picked up the ringing phone. "Reynolds?" A brisk male voice came through immediately. "Officer Reynolds, this is Assistant District Attorney Stephen Klein. We're confirming the midnight schedule proceeds without delays." Mark's posture stiffened. "Yes, sir," he said. "We're on schedule." "There have been inquiries," Klein continued, clipped and impatient. "Last-minute games are common. We need to ensure the facility doesn't entertain anything outside protocol." Mark glanced at the other phone, Emily still waiting on the line. "Understood," Mark said. Klein's voice hardened. "No visitors beyond approved list, no media, no deviations. The state's position is clear." Mark swallowed the urge to argue. "Yes, sir." The line clicked dead. He sat for a moment with the dial tone still buzzing faintly in his ear. Then he returned to Emily's call. "You heard that?" Emily asked, as if she'd sensed it through the silence. "Not word for word," Mark said, "but the message is plain. They want this finished. Clean." Emily's voice dropped. "Mark, if he asked for Buddy, he's not asking for comfort," she said. "He's asking for something he can't say to a person." Mark rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Even if I wanted to, I can't just bring a police dog into the execution wing," he said. "That's not a request. That's a security risk." "Then do it the safe way," Emily replied. "Controlled room, restraints, 2 officers present, Buddy on lead. No contact if you say so." Mark exhaled sharply. "And what do you think happens if Buddy comes in and nothing happens? We look like fools. We give him a scene." Emily answered with quiet force. "And what if something does happen?" she said. "What if Buddy reacts like the file never made sense? Mark, I'm not saying this lightly, but if there's even a chance, even a small one, you don't want to be wrong on a night like this." Mark felt the weight of the clock without looking at it. He could almost hear Daniel Cooper's calm voice again. Plenty of time. "I'll consider it," Mark said. Emily didn't push. She only said, "If you decide yes, I can be there in 30 minutes." Mark ended the call and stood, then walked down the hall toward the small administrative office used for final paperwork. A woman was there, seated at a table with a stack of folders and a laptop. Rachel Morgan, a contract attorney who handled late-stage filings when families or courts sent last-minute documents. She looked up when Mark entered, her expression professional but tired. "Evening," Rachel said. "You look like someone just handed you a problem." Mark hesitated, then surprised himself by speaking. "Condemned man requested to see the police dog from his case," he said. Rachel's eyebrows lifted. "That's unusual." Mark nodded. "He says the dog remembers." Rachel leaned back slightly, thinking. "Which case?" she asked. "Cooper," Mark answered. The attorney's face shifted, subtle, but real. She pulled one of the folders closer, scanning the spine label as if her hands already knew where to go. "I reviewed that record once," Rachel said quietly. "Not deeply, but enough to notice something odd. There was a chain of custody note about scent evidence that didn't match the standard form." Mark felt his stomach tighten. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Rachel said carefully, "that if the scent sample was handled improperly, it could have been contaminated, or it could have been logged wrong. Either way, it was a weak link dressed up as strong." Mark stared at her. "You're telling me this now?" "I'm telling you because you brought up the dog," she replied. "And because you look like you'd rather not carry regret." Mark thought of the DA's voice. No deviations, no delays. He looked back down the hallway toward Daniel Cooper's cell. The man had 90 minutes left, and yet he'd asked for something no one asked for unless it mattered. Mark's throat went dry. Outside the execution wing, the building hummed with routine. Inside it, something had shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a lock turning one notch. Mark Reynolds picked up the phone again, and this time he dialed Sergeant Emily Harper back. "Bring Buddy," he said, "but we do it my way, controlled, no mistakes." On the other end, Emily's breath caught, then steadied. "I'll be there," she said, "and Mark, thank you." Mark stared at the clock above the desk. 68 minutes remained. By the time Sergeant Emily Harper arrived, the clock had slipped under the hour mark. The Huntsville unit's side entrance opened with a muted buzz, and Emily stepped inside, carrying a leash looped once around her wrist. At the other end walked Buddy, his golden coat clean and brushed, his pace unhurried. He moved the way he always did, calm, observant, tail low but loose, as if the world rarely gave him reason to hurry. The officers at the checkpoint stiffened when they saw him. Dogs didn't belong here. Not tonight. "Clear path," Mark Reynolds said, his voice firm. "We're on a tight schedule." Emily nodded, saying nothing. She didn't need to speak to Buddy. He already understood that this was not a place for curiosity or play. His ears shifted slightly as they passed through the last secured door, registering the change in air, the smell of disinfectant, metal, and something older, fear, layered deep into the concrete. As they walked down the execution wing, Emily felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She had walked Buddy into crime scenes, disaster zones, places where chaos still hung in the air. This was different. This place felt finished, sealed off from hope by design. They stopped outside a reinforced meeting room, smaller than the standard visitation space. A steel bench bolted to the floor, a table fixed to the wall, thick glass on one side, solid bars on the other. "Restraints stay on," Mark said. "No sudden movement. You keep Buddy on lead." "Understood," Emily replied. Mark turned to Buddy and studied him for a moment. "You know this isn't a normal assignment," he said, half to Emily, half to himself. Buddy looked up briefly, then forward again. Inside the room, Daniel Cooper sat exactly where Mark had left him. Same posture, same stillness. The only difference was his eyes. They lifted the moment the door opened. He saw Buddy before he saw Emily. For the first time that night, Daniel's composure fractured. His breath caught sharply, as if his body had reacted before his mind could catch up. His hands trembled, fingers curling inward as though he were bracing against something invisible. "You came," Daniel said, his voice breaking on the words. Emily felt her throat tighten. She had been warned not to engage, not to encourage conversation. Still, she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. This wasn't relief. This was recognition. Buddy stopped a few feet from Daniel, waiting. Emily loosened the leash just enough to allow movement, but kept her grip firm. Buddy took one step forward, then another, his nose lifting slightly as he drew in the air. Daniel sank down onto his knees without being told. "I didn't know if they'd let you," Daniel said quietly. "I didn't know if you'd remember." Buddy's tail gave a slow, single sweep. He moved closer, not cautiously, not aggressively. He leaned forward and rested his head against Daniel's chest, right over the heart. His weight was gentle but certain, as if he had found exactly where he was meant to be. The sound Daniel made then was not loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of a man finally exhaling after holding his breath for years. Mark Reynolds felt something shift behind his ribs. He had seen tears before. He had never seen them fall like this, unprotected, unashamed. Daniel wrapped his arms around himself, careful not to touch Buddy directly, respecting the boundaries he'd been warned about. His shoulders shook. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so damn sorry." Buddy didn't move. Emily watched closely, every sense alert. Buddy was trained to react to threat, to tension, to aggression. None of that was here. His breathing stayed slow. His ears remained relaxed. His focus was total, but not alarmed. This was not the behavior of a dog confronting a violent offender. "This isn't right," Mark murmured under his breath. Daniel lifted his face, wet with tears, and met Mark's eyes. "He knows," Daniel said. "He always did." "Knows what?" Mark asked. Daniel didn't answer. Buddy shifted then, lifting his head. He sniffed again, more deliberately this time, his nose moving along Daniel's torso, then down toward the floor. Emily stiffened. This was not comfort behavior. This was assessment. Buddy took a step back, then another. He turned his head toward the far corner of the room. Emily followed his gaze. A pair of worn, prison-issued shoes sat neatly against the wall, toes pointed outward, untouched since Daniel had been brought in. "Buddy?" Emily whispered. Buddy walked away from Daniel and toward the shoes, nose low, focused. He circled once, slow and precise, then stopped. He sat. Emily's breath caught. That signal was unmistakable. Mark's heart began to pound. "What does that mean?" he asked, though he already sensed the answer. Emily swallowed. "It means he's picking up something that doesn't belong," she said, "a scent that doesn't match the man in this room." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was no relief in his expression, only resolve. "There it is," he said softly. "That's why I needed him." Emily looked at him sharply. "Mr. Cooper?" "Daniel," he corrected. "Please." The clock on the wall ticked louder than before. Mark took a step forward. "If you know something," he said, his voice low, "now is the time." Daniel nodded once. "There's a name," he said. "It was never written down, never spoken in court." Emily felt the room tilt slightly, as if the ground itself had shifted. "What name?" Mark asked. Daniel's gaze flicked to Buddy, who sat patiently by the shoes, waiting. "Ryan Mills," Daniel said. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood the same terrible truth. This meeting was not a farewell. It was an opening. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The room seemed to shrink around them, as if the concrete walls had leaned in to listen. Buddy remained seated by the shoes, his posture straight, his gaze steady. He did not look at Daniel. He did not look at Emily. His attention was fixed on something only he could fully understand. Mark Reynolds felt the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. He had trusted procedure for most of his adult life. He had trusted it because it kept things simple, right or wrong, guilty or innocent, open or shut. What he was seeing now did not fit into those categories. "Emily," he said quietly, "explain it to me." "Plain?" Emily kept her voice low, careful not to break Buddy's focus. "Buddy is trained to distinguish between primary and secondary scent," she said. "If the scent on those shoes belonged to Daniel Cooper, he would have alerted on Daniel himself. He didn't." Mark's eyes drifted to Daniel, who sat motionless on the floor, his hands resting on his thighs. "So what is he alerting to?" Emily hesitated. "Another person," she said. "Someone whose scent was transferred onto those shoes." Daniel let out a slow breath. "He wore them," Daniel said. "Just once, long enough." Mark turned sharply. "Who?" he demanded. Daniel lifted his head. His eyes were red, but steady. "Ryan Mills," he said again. "He borrowed my shoes the night it happened. Said he needed them for grip. Said his soles were worn." Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had heard confessions before. This didn't sound like one. It sounded like a memory that had been carried too long. "You're saying the shoes were contaminated," Mark said. "That the scent evidence was never mine," Daniel finished. I didn't know enough back then to fight it. I didn't think anyone would listen. But he knew. The dog knew. Buddy shifted slightly, then stayed seated, his signal firm. A sharp electronic tone cut through the room. The intercom mounted high on the wall crackled to life. "Officer Reynolds," a voice said, clipped and impatient. "Status update." Mark glanced at the clock. 47 minutes. "We're in the middle of a final request," Mark replied evenly. There was a pause. "Proceed," the voice said, "but do not exceed the allotted window." The line went dead. Emily straightened, tension coiling in her shoulders. "We don't have time to debate theory," she said. "If there's a problem with the evidence, we need to confirm it. Now." Mark nodded slowly. "Rachel Morgan," he said. "Get her in here." Moments later, Rachel entered the room, her expression alert, the instant she saw Buddy seated by the shoes. She took in the scene, the posture, the silence, the unmistakable signal. "Oh," she murmured, "that's not good." "Depends on your definition," Mark said. Rachel crouched near the shoes, careful not to touch them. "Those were entered as primary scent carriers," she said. "If the dog is telling us the scent belongs to someone else—" "Then the chain of custody is compromised," Emily said. Rachel's jaw tightened. "And if that's true, the conviction rests on a foundation that shouldn't have held." Daniel looked at her. "I didn't take the stand because they told me it wouldn't matter," he said. "They said the dog was enough." Rachel met his gaze. "Sometimes it is," she said. "Sometimes it isn't." A sudden sound echoed from the hallway, hurried footsteps, then the metallic clatter of keys. Mark stepped to the door just as a junior officer approached, breathless. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "we just had a security alert. Someone tried to access the evidence storage system." "Digitally?" Mark's pulse quickened. "Who?" The officer swallowed. "No ID logged. The access attempt was aborted, but it triggered an alert." Emily felt the implication settle like a stone. "Someone's watching," she said, "and they don't want this reopened." "He's still." Daniel closed his eyes. "He's still out there," he said. "I knew he would be." Rachel stood, her mind already racing. "If someone is actively interfering," she said, "that strengthens an emergency motion. But we need something tangible, something we can document." Buddy rose from his seated position and turned back toward Daniel. He approached him slowly, sniffed once more, then looked up at Emily. His tail wagged once, brief, restrained. Emily exhaled shakily. "He's done," she said. "He's told us what he can." Mark looked at Daniel. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" he asked. Daniel met his eyes. "Because Ryan Mills didn't threaten me," he said. "He threatened someone else." Rachel's head snapped up. "Who?" "A woman named Lily Carter," Daniel said. "She saw him that night. He told me if I talked, she'd disappear. I believed him." The clock ticked louder. Mark felt the weight of every year he had spent enforcing decisions made by others. "If we proceed," he said, "we're stepping outside the lines." Rachel's voice was steady. "If we don't," she replied, "we execute a man on evidence that may have been manipulated." Silence filled the room again, thick, pressing. Then Mark made his decision. "Remove the shoes," he said. "Seal them. I want an immediate review of the scent logs and the digital access attempt, and get Detective Brooks on the line. Now." Emily clipped Buddy's leash securely and gave him a gentle pat. "Good job," she whispered. As Buddy turned toward the door, Daniel spoke once more. "Thank you," he said to the dog, "for listening." Buddy paused, glanced back at him, and wagged his tail once. Outside the room, alarms did not sound. No sirens blared, but something far more dangerous had begun to move. The truth, once stirred, did not like to stay buried. And somewhere within the walls of the Huntsville unit, someone was realizing that tonight was no longer under control. The first thing Mark Reynolds did after sealing the shoes was check the clock. 36 minutes. The number sat in his mind like a weight pressing down on his chest. In his years at Huntsville, he had learned that time could be a weapon. Tonight, it was being used against them. "Move him," came a voice over the radio. "We're advancing the schedule." Mark turned sharply. "Who authorized that?" A pause. Then, "Deputy Warden Delaney. Orders from above." Mark felt a surge of anger cut through his restraint. "Negative," he said into the radio. "We're in the middle of a procedural review." Another pause, shorter this time. "That review does not suspend execution protocol," the voice replied. "Prepare the inmate." Mark lowered the radio slowly. He knew Frank Delaney. Everyone in the unit did. Delaney was efficient, respected, and deeply invested in keeping the system moving. He did not like complications. He liked clean endings. "This is deliberate," Emily Harper said quietly. Buddy stood close at her side, his posture alert now, sensing the shift in tension. "They're trying to outrun the truth." Rachel Morgan stepped closer to Mark. "If they move Daniel now," she said, "they cut off our window to file anything meaningful." Mark nodded once. "Then we don't let them." Before either woman could respond, the door at the far end of the hallway opened. Deputy Warden Frank Delaney walked in, flanked by 2 officers. His expression was calm, almost bored, as if this were a routine correction rather than a crisis. "Reynolds," Delaney said, "we're behind schedule." "We're exactly where we need to be," Mark replied. "There's a problem with the evidence." Delaney raised an eyebrow. "I've heard that argument before, usually at the 11th hour." "This isn't theatrics," Mark said. "There was an unauthorized access attempt to the evidence system, and the K-9 alert contradicts the original scent report." Delaney's gaze flicked briefly to Buddy, then away. "A dog is not grounds for delay," he said. "We're not reopening a closed case because an animal sat down in the wrong place." Emily bristled. "Buddy doesn't sit in the wrong place," she said. "Not ever." Delaney ignored her. "Move the inmate," he repeated. "Now." Mark took a step forward, placing himself squarely between Delaney and the holding room. "Sir," he said evenly, "with respect, if we proceed and this evidence turns out to be compromised, this facility will be responsible for executing an innocent man." Delaney's jaw tightened. "That's not your determination to make." "No," Mark agreed, "but it is my responsibility to stop a mistake when I see one." For a long moment, no one moved. The air felt charged, brittle, like it might crack if anyone raised their voice. Then Delaney smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Escort Cooper to the preparation room," he said. "I'll handle the rest." The officers stepped past Mark before he could stop them. "Daniel," Mark said quickly as they entered the holding room, "listen to me. We're working on this." Daniel stood slowly as the restraints were adjusted. His face was calm again, but his eyes told a different story. He leaned closer to Mark as they guided him toward the door. "They're trying to end it before you can prove anything," Daniel said quietly. "He's done this before." Mark's heart skipped. "Who?" he asked. "Ryan," Daniel replied, "but he's not the only one who benefits if I die tonight." Emily caught Daniel's words and felt her stomach drop. "Who else?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then looked past them toward the administrative corridor. "The man who made sure my statement never made it into the file," he said. "The man who told the jury the dog never makes mistakes." Rachel's eyes widened. "You're saying someone in authority manipulated the record?" Daniel nodded. "I didn't understand it then. I do now." They moved him down the hall toward the preparation room, the walls closing in as if the building itself were urging them forward. Buddy watched Daniel go, his ears pulled back slightly, his body tense. "This is wrong," Emily said. "This is all wrong." Rachel was already dialing her phone. "I'm filing an emergency motion," she said, "even if it only buys us minutes." Mark stopped just outside the preparation room as the officers guided Daniel inside. The door shut with a final echoing clang. Inside, the room was stark and clinical. A gurney waited beneath harsh lights. Tubes lay neatly coiled on a stainless steel tray. Daniel looked at it, then back at Mark. "If I don't walk out of here," he said, "promise me one thing." Mark swallowed. "What?" "Find Lily Carter," Daniel said. "She's still in danger." Mark nodded once. "I promise." As the door closed between them, Mark felt a cold certainty settle in his bones. This was no longer about a last request. Someone wanted Daniel Cooper dead before the truth could breathe. And with each second that passed, the distance between justice and execution grew thinner. Behind Mark, Buddy let out a low, uneasy sound, soft but unmistakable. The clock struck the 30-minute mark. The countdown had entered its most dangerous phase. The corridor outside the preparation room felt colder than the rest of the wing, as if the building itself knew what was happening inside. Mark Reynolds stood there for a moment longer than protocol allowed, staring at the sealed door, listening to the muted sounds beyond it. Footsteps, the soft clink of metal, the careful efficiency of a process designed never to hesitate. Then he turned away. "We don't have much time," he said, lowering his voice as he moved toward the administrative office. "If we're going to stop this, we need something concrete." Rachel Morgan was already seated at the desk, her laptop open, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Her calm was practiced, but the tension showed in the set of her shoulders. "I'm drafting an emergency filing," she said without looking up. "New evidence, possible contamination, active interference with state records. It's thin, but it's real." Emily Harper stood near the door with Buddy at her side. The dog's posture had changed. He was no longer relaxed. His ears were angled forward, his gaze steady, as if waiting for a cue. "Paper won't be enough," Emily said. "Not in 30 minutes. Mark nodded. "Then we find the evidence they tried to hide." Rachel looked up sharply. "You said there was an unauthorized access attempt?" "Yes," Mark replied. "Digital only, no physical breach." "That means someone tried to alter records," Rachel said. "Which records?" Mark didn't answer right away. He walked to the terminal mounted on the wall and logged in with his credentials. The screen glowed softly as lines of access logs appeared. "There," he said, pointing, "Evidence Storage Index. Time-stamped 20 minutes ago." Emily stepped closer. "What does that tell us?" "It tells us someone tried to reach a file that hasn't been touched in years," Mark said. "And they wanted to do it quietly." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Which file?" Mark read the identifier aloud. "Sent sample. Warehouse robbery. Case 14-771. Logged under Cooper." Emily felt a chill. "That's Buddy's alert." Rachel stood. "If that file was altered, even attempted, it supports an emergency stay," she said. "But we need to know what was in it originally." Mark's jaw tightened. "That file should have included a supplemental note," he said. "A secondary handling report." Emily looked at him. "Should have?" Mark nodded. "I remember signing off on transport. There was a note about delayed sealing. It never made it into the digital record." Rachel's breath caught. "If that note was omitted, then the chain of custody was never complete," Emily finished, "and the scent evidence was flawed from the start." Buddy suddenly lifted his head. Emily stilled. "What is it, boy?" Buddy let out a low sound, not a growl, but not quite a whine either. He turned his head toward the hallway that led to the old storage annex, an area rarely used now, its contents long since digitized. Mark followed his gaze. That section was decommissioned, he said, but some physical backups are still there. Rachel didn't hesitate. Then that's where we go. They moved quickly, footsteps echoing softly as they descended a narrow stairwell. The air grew stale, dustier, carrying the faint scent of old paper and metal. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, slower here, less certain. At the end of the corridor stood a locked door marked Records Archive. Mark swiped his card. The lock buzzed open. Inside, rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, their labels yellowed with age. This was where paper went when no one expected it to matter anymore. Emily unclipped Buddy's leash just enough to give him room. "Find it," she whispered. Buddy moved forward immediately, nose low, weaving between cabinets with quiet purpose. He stopped at the third row, fourth drawer down. He sat. Emily's heart pounded. That's it. Mark pulled the drawer open. Inside were manila folders, neatly arranged. Rachel reached in and scanned the labels until her fingers froze. "Here," she said. "Supplemental handling report. Unlogged." She opened the folder. Inside was a single form, stamped and signed, dated 5 years earlier. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. Delayed sealing due to third-party contact. Potential cross-contamination noted. Further verification recommended. Rachel looked up slowly. This should have been disclosed. Emily closed her eyes. They ignored it. "No," Mark said quietly. "They buried it?" Buddy stood beside them, tail still, his job done. Rachel snapped photos of the document with her phone, then attached them to her filing. "This changes everything," she said. "This proves the scent evidence was never reliable." A sharp buzz sounded from Mark's radio. "Reynolds!" a voice barked. "Where are you?" Mark pressed the button. "Handling an internal matter." "Return to the execution wing immediately," the voice ordered. "We are proceeding." Mark looked at Rachel. "How long?" She checked her screen. "If I submit this now, it'll reach the duty judge in minutes, whether he reads it in time." Emily didn't let her finish. "We don't wait," she said. "We go back." They hurried up the stairs, Buddy trotting close, sensing the urgency. As they reached the corridor, Mark's phone vibrated in his pocket. An unknown number. He answered it. "Officer Reynolds," a voice said, low and unfamiliar. "You should stop digging." Mark's grip tightened. "Who is this?" "A friend," the voice replied. "You're putting a lot of people at risk over a man who's already condemned." Mark glanced at Emily and Rachel, then at Buddy. "If he's innocent," Mark said, "he's already been at risk." The line went dead. They reached the execution wing just as the clock ticked down to 18 minutes. Inside the preparation room, Daniel Cooper lay restrained, staring at the ceiling. His face was pale but composed. Mark stepped forward. "Daniel," he said, his voice steady. "We found it." Daniel turned his head slightly. "The file?" "Yes." For the first time that night, Daniel's eyes filled with something other than resignation. Hope. Outside the room, Rachel's phone chimed. She looked at the screen, then up at Mark. "The judge is reviewing the motion," she said. "It's not over yet." The clock kept moving, but now, for the first time, it was no longer running alone. The final countdown began without ceremony. There was no announcement, no dramatic shift in tone. Just a quiet tightening of procedure as the system prepared to move forward, regardless of what had been uncovered. The execution wing did not pause for doubt. It had been built to outlast it. Mark Reynolds stood just outside the preparation room, eyes fixed on the clock mounted above the door. 12 minutes. Rachel Morgan paced a few steps away, phone in hand, refreshing the same screen again and again. Each second, without an update, felt heavier than the last. She had filed everything she could, photos of the buried report, timestamps, sworn statements, but the machinery of the courts did not move at the speed of impending death. Emily Harper remained still, Buddy seated at her feet. His head was up now, ears alert, watching the closed door as if he understood exactly what waited on the other side. Emily rested a hand lightly on his collar, drawing quiet strength from the steady warmth beneath her palm. Inside the room, Daniel Cooper lay restrained on the gurney, straps firm, but not cruel. He stared at the ceiling, counting the hairline cracks in the paint, the way he once counted days in his cell. His breathing was slow, deliberate. Panic would not help him now. A technician adjusted a tray, the soft clink of glass and metal echoing in the sterile space. Daniel turned his head slightly. "Sir," he said, his voice calm, "may I ask something?" The technician hesitated, then nodded. "Make it quick." "Do you believe in coincidences?" Daniel asked. The man paused, then shook his head. "I believe in schedules." Daniel smiled faintly. "So did I. Once." The door opened briefly as Mark stepped inside. He moved closer to Daniel, lowering his voice. "We found the report," Mark said, "the one that never made it into your file." Daniel's chest rose and fell. Then Buddy was right. "He was," Mark replied. Daniel swallowed. "Did you find Lily?" Mark shook his head. "Not yet, but we're looking." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was no fear in them, only urgency. "Ryan won't stop," Daniel said. "If he knows this is coming out, he'll move. Lily doesn't know how dangerous he really is." Mark nodded. "We'll protect her." Daniel searched his face. "Promise me you won't wait," he said. "Not like they waited with me." Mark didn't hesitate. "I won't." The intercom crackled overhead. 10 minutes. Outside the room, Deputy Warden Frank Delaney appeared at the far end of the hall, his stride measured, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet from Mark. "Any word from the court?" Delaney asked. Rachel stepped forward before Mark could answer. "The motion is under review," she said. "There is credible evidence of mishandled forensic material." Delaney's eyes flicked to her phone. "Review does not mean approval." "No," Rachel replied evenly. "But execution during active judicial consideration opens the state to consequences it won't outrun." Delaney smiled thinly. "You're assuming the judge will side with you?" "I'm assuming," Rachel said, "that a judge doesn't like being ignored." The intercom sounded again. 8 minutes. Emily felt Buddy shift beside her. He rose slowly to his feet, tail stiff, eyes fixed on Delaney. The dog did not bark. He did not growl. He simply stood there, unblinking. Delaney noticed. "Control your animal," he said sharply. Emily met his gaze. "He is controlled," she said. "That's why you should be nervous." Delaney scoffed and turned away, speaking into his radio. "Proceed." Inside the preparation room, the technician moved toward the IV line. Daniel's heart rate monitor beeped steadily. "Wait," Daniel said. The technician paused. "We're on schedule." Daniel turned his head, eyes clear. "I know," he said. "I just want you to know something." The man hesitated. "What's that?" Daniel took a breath. "If the call comes through, if they stop this, you'll hear it like a door slamming open. Don't miss it." The technician looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Outside, Rachel's phone vibrated in her hand. She looked down, then she froze. "Mark," she said, her voice tight, "it's ringing." Mark stepped closer. "Answer it." She did. "This is Judge Halverson," a voice said through the speaker. "I've reviewed the emergency filing." Everyone in the corridor stilled. "The documentation indicates a material failure in evidence handling," the judge continued. "Under these circumstances, I am issuing a temporary stay pending full review." Rachel closed her eyes as relief surged through her. "Effective immediately," the judge said. "Stop the execution." The intercom crackled to life almost simultaneously. "Hold!" a voice shouted. "We have a stay." Inside the preparation room, the technician's hands froze inches from the IV. Daniel heard the words and felt the weight of the straps ease, not physically, but in his chest, where something had been clenched tight for 5 years. Outside, Mark exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Delaney turned sharply. "That's not possible," he said. Rachel met his eyes. "It is," she replied. "And it's done." Emily dropped to one knee beside Buddy, burying her face briefly in his fur. "Good boy," she whispered. The clock above the door continued to tick, but for the first time that night, it no longer sounded like a countdown. It sounded like a heartbeat. The execution wing did not erupt into chaos when the stay came through. There were no raised voices, no arguments shouted across the hall. The system was too disciplined for that. It simply stopped. The technician stepped back from the gurney. The IV line remained untouched. A supervisor entered the room, verified the order, and nodded once. The straps were loosened. One by one, the procedures that had been set in motion were quietly undone. Daniel Cooper lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds change. The beeping monitor slowed. Footsteps retreated. A door opened where no door was supposed to open again. Mark Reynolds stood at Daniel's side when the final restraint was removed. "It's over," Mark said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "For tonight." Daniel turned his head. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his chest rose sharply as he drew in a breath that felt unfamiliar, full, unguarded. "I didn't ask for my life back," Daniel said quietly. "I asked for the truth to be heard." Mark nodded. "You got both." Outside the room, Deputy Warden Frank Delaney was escorted away, his authority suspended pending investigation. He did not protest. He did not explain. He walked the same hallway Daniel had walked hours earlier, but without the weight of chains, only the heavier burden of exposure. Rachel Morgan leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up to her. The fight was far from over. Appeals, hearings, inquiries. But the most important thing had already happened. The state had been forced to pause, and in that pause, the truth had found air. Emily Harper knelt beside Buddy, who sat calmly now, his work finished. She rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "You saved him," she whispered. Buddy wagged his tail once, slow and gentle. Later that night, Daniel was moved back to a secure holding unit, not as a man waiting to die, but as a man whose case was open again. As they passed through the corridor, he stopped briefly when he saw Buddy. Emily hesitated, then looked to Mark. Mark nodded. Emily loosened the leash. Daniel knelt carefully, and this time there were no restraints between them. Buddy stepped forward immediately, pressing his head against Daniel's chest just as he had before. Only now the weight of it felt different. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice thick. "You heard what no one else did." Buddy licked his hand once, then stepped back, tail wagging. Months passed. The investigation widened quickly. The buried report led to others, small omissions, quiet alterations, decisions made in back rooms under the belief that no one would ever look again. Ryan Mills was located after a traffic stop 2 states away. When Buddy joined the search during a coordinated operation, there was no hesitation, no confusion. The alert was immediate. Lily Carter was found alive, shaken, but safe. When she learned that the man who had once taken the blame to protect her was still alive, She cried the way people cry when guilt finally loosens its grip. Daniel Cooper was formally exonerated the following year. On a quiet autumn morning, he stood outside a modest K-9 training field, hands tucked into the pockets of a borrowed jacket. The fence between him and the field was low, almost symbolic. On the other side, Buddy, now retired, chased a tennis ball with the same measured joy he had always carried. Emily threw the ball again, laughing softly as Buddy trotted back, prize in his mouth. Daniel watched, his face calm, changed. Mark Reynolds stood beside him. "Funny thing," Mark said. "All those years I thought my job was about enforcing endings." Daniel smiled faintly. "Turns out it was about stopping the wrong one." Buddy returned to Emily, then glanced toward Daniel, tail wagging. Daniel raised a hand in a small wave. Buddy barked once, happy and bright. The miracle everyone spoke about later was never supernatural. It didn't arrive with thunder or light. It arrived with a heartbeat, steady, patient, and true. A golden retriever listened. And because he did, a man lived, a truth surfaced, and a system was forced at least once to remember what justice was meant to be. Before you leave, I want to ask you something. If you believe that this man deserved to live, if you believe that the dog helped reveal the truth, please type 1 in the comments. And if you believe this story shows that justice still needs a heart, even inside the coldest walls, type 0. Your comment matters more than you think. It tells us which stories should be told next. And if you stayed until the end, please consider subscribing to this channel. Here, we share quiet, powerful stories about truth, courage, and the unexpected bonds that change lives forever. Thank you for listening. More stories are coming soon.